Get over here as we take a look at Cyborg Scorpion. I have to say, this boss is just plain weak. While you can easily cheese it just by sniping it from afar, even fighting it normally isn't much of a challenge. It only has missiles and gamma cannon blasts, both of which can be solved pretty easily with moderate distance and strafing. Even the ending of the level isn't that great, where you're informed there's an army of zombies and you need to go into Victorian England. That seems like slightly less urgent than the planet blowing up or being plunged into a nuclear winter, honestly. The EDF shouldn't have any trouble with such slow-moving non-threats. About the only danger in this boss fight is accidentally falling into the lava, which is mitigated by paying attention. Honestly, it's a significantly duller boss than Boss Hog, both fight and design-wise. It's time to pay homage to our nation's finest lady in Liberty or Death. The level is alright, but it's definitely not that good. It's mostly linear underground pumping stations. Probably the highlight of these sections is a big fan, but you just shoot it so it's not overly complicated. Having so many shootable grates that you would have to awkwardly navigate around is also not great, though I mostly avoided that issue. At least there's a mall court to shake things up, though it's just 2 bathrooms and a Duke Burger, and the mean streets did that second one better. It ends on a pretty interesting note with you fighting near some kind of device and everything suddenly explodes at the end, but mostly the level is pretty forgettable. It seems more like the Statue of Liberty was used as a gimmick at the beginning and the rest is pretty much a shrug to me. It's time to kick off Duke Nukem 0 Hour with Training Mission Episode 1. The level's mainly to kickstart the story with a second Duke Nukem talking about time travel and aliens and how it's up to you to kick ass and save the world. It does, however, also come with an optional tutorial in the form of a training course. You could blow right past it and just end the level fast if you want, but it's nice to have it there to familiarize you with some of the mechanics. You've got a gas chamber to teach you to use items, an obstacle course for moving and jumping, and a shooting range. The shooting range has pistols, sniper rifle, night vision, and grenade launcher sections, which more or less covers the major types of weapons. Even a medical bay if you manage to get yourself hurt on acid or self-fired grenades. As a plot introductory / tutorial level, it more than gets the job done, and you can do a lot worse, especially back then. It's time for a new land in Fort Roswell. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you, this map just didn't appeal to me all that much. Despite what you may think, I'm not just being salty over all the booby traps. If anything, I'm being salty because of how the map shoves you forward and isn't afraid to permanently lock doors behind you, which I frankly do not approve of. As someone who likes his classic shooters with some exploration, not only being linear but actively barring the way back is just plain dirty. While on a more intriguing note, it's one of 2 times where you fight an actual historical figure, and there's something odd seeing Duke kill a non-possessed human. Even if that human is someone as controversial as General Custer. While I get what the level is going for, cheap thrills just don't do it for me, and I'd like to have more breathing room. It's time to pop an ice-cold Nuka-Cola in Fallout. This level definitely isn't bad, but it feels more like a straight line than previous levels, even down to having a point of no return halfway into it. While there's some wiggle room here or there, like an optional secret area right before the exit, it's not one of the most open-ended maps out there. Admittedly, though, destroying the alien shield generator and then having to cut and run from the explosion fireball coming towards you is pretty exciting. That's about all the level has in terms of being new or interesting, though, with the rest of it frankly coming across as a retread of elements for the most part. The rooftops in the last rung of the level at least make good use of verticality, but spotting a sniper in those cramped sections is just low. First, it's time for a sausage party with Boss Hog. Yep, it's a boss level, and there really isn't that much to the level other than being a helipad. The boss himself is basically a giant hog with a cowboy hat sitting on top of a tank. I'll admit I was even inspired by the design to make the final boss for a game I made. He just goes around in a circle pelting you with grenades and missiles, and he'll turn around if you're right behind him. He can be pretty tough normally, but I went in with BMF ammo from the previous level, so he was an absolute cakewalk for me, despite being on hard. Of course, the level concludes with a setup to the first of your time travel destinations, the Wild West. The Terminator reference at the end was pretty funny, and the silhouette implies Duke is about as undressed as he was. It's terror time again in Dawn of the Duke. Gonna be honest, this one has more style than it does substance. It has some cool things like an homage to the first 2 Duke Nukem games and coffins rising out of the ground, but not that much to do in the level. Then you've got a boat ride, and the toxic water lowering is neat, but it's a very slow going ride that you're stuck on until the end. All that's missing is for "It's a small world after all" to be blasting as aliens are blasting at you. It's not terrible, it's an alright level, but it definitely has concepts that sound cooler on paper than they actually are in execution. I'll give it credit for switching things up and having a few areas off to the side, but the Victorian era isn't impressing very much so far. Grab your sharp instrument because it's time to brainstorm. The best thing I can say about this boss is it's sort of like a cross between Shub from Quake and the Icon of Sin from Doom. The reason I say this is the boss does nothing but the 4 life support machines you have to break are summoning specific enemies. That by itself wouldn't be too impressive, but there are different ways to take out each machine so it doesn't get stale. The latter 2 straight up require you to trigger a cave-in and then navigate buttons while under sniper fire. I feel that gives Brainstorm the edge over those 2 I mentioned. It gives it more of a puzzle aspect. That and the level isn't just a single room, even if it isn't the most visually varied. Brainstorm may not be much of a boss, but it's an alright map taken by itself. I hope you've brought a paddle because we're up Ship Creek. One thing I love about this one is there are technically 2 different ways you can get inside the ship. The entrance is guarded by 2 BMF sentries and you can take them down, albeit taking a huge risk. Or you can go through a cave and a teleporter to flip a switch that shuts them and 2 normal ones down. This is also where the dreaded cyborg enforcer enters the chat. Very tanky and damaging lasers, but the sniper rifle or just circle strafing helps. When you beat him, he bends over like he's trying to take a dump, and he might actually be because he drops a gamma crystal. And then there's an explosion. He must have pigged out on the chili. As far as maps go, you can definitely do worse, and it's an interesting introduction to a very tough enemy, not to mention technically having a pretty pleasing and varied aesthetic. It's time to get very interesting dreams in Wet World. Or at least if your idea of an interesting time is to have sniper dots trained on your forehead. While that's not too hard to get around, the other peril in this level is underwater drones. They fire humming torpedoes at you, but you can easily get around them just by surfacing and they will harmlessly blow up. It's a good thing Duke brought his 13-inch boots of plot armor. Probably the one part of the level I disliked the most was getting inside a ship to get a guard tower key. If you run out of night vision before you get the key and get out, then say hello to pitch blackness, though at least there aren't any enemies. It's not the biggest or most open-ended map either, but at least it was a pretty fun level while it lasted. Raise the castle walls because we're under siege. The map certainly knows how to get your blood pumping from the start because when you enter the base, you've got a minute to reach the front door. There's even a BMF turret that can just erase you if its shot gets anywhere close, so it's pretty tense. Perhaps as another sign this map means business, it drops the ambiance from the previous Future Apocalypse maps for music again. Most of the base is pretty cramped halls, but at least they're relatively non-linear. You have some room to explore around, and there's a few rooms that are bigger, including the big time machine room. Ending off the level and manning a turret and shredding the alien forces is also pretty satisfying, even though it's scripted. It's time to face our scornful parent and alien mother. I'll be honest, I'm torn on this one. It's visually excellent, but it's basically a straight-line gauntlet. While elements of an alien base have been shown before, it nicely captures a mix of the kind of vine seen in 3D with what looks like highly advanced tech. However, that really doesn't excuse the level being incredibly linear without any deviating paths at all. Other than destroying containers for items, backtracking didn't really offer anything after beating the level. I'm not saying every level has to be completely sprawling, but a bit more branches like going down would have been appreciated. It's an alien mothership, so having things like personal quarters or munitions factories that are optional would have gone a long way. It's a nice looking level with plenty of challenge, but it's ultimately feeling a bit shallow. It's time to Sherlock Holmes through the Whitechapel killings. Well, mystery solved, my dear Watson. The killer was Jack the Ripper, who you have to fight. He would be the other historical figure you have to fight, and he's the more interesting one, but also kind of easier. The level's alright, but it's definitely not great. It doesn't help that the Victorian era is the weaker of the time period, something Duke even lampshades.
Great. Stuck in the wussiest past they could think of.
The main threat, zombies, were already in nuclear future, but now they leave a gas cloud behind. Ooh! That's the closest to a new enemy in this map, unless you count 2 reskinned pigs. Well, seeing the conversation from the opening cutscene from the other side was pretty neat at least. It's not a bad level, but it's the weakest of the time period introduction levels. Granted, the other three were stiff competition, especially Dry Town. It's time for midnight because it's 0 hour. Just so I don't seem like I'm being completely negative, I will say that this is a big improvement over Duke 3D's Cycloid Emperor. The rooftops add an interesting kind of challenge since he loves to use a stomp attack, and if you're close to the edges, instant death. Zero himself isn't the toughest though. You're given more than enough to beat him, including homing missiles and the BMF. There really isn't that much to the map apart from rooftops and a ring in the middle. His attacks aren't the most varied in the world either apart from the stomp, mainly relying on things like gas breath and projectiles. Still, I can't complain too much, at least Zero actually feels like a proper boss fight. The map also looks visually nice and spacious, and the threat of dying if you mistime your jump technically makes this more challenging than the other bosses. I hope you're ready to walk the green mile because it's time for a jailbreak. Yep, this is at least the third time Duke found himself in prison, and much like the previous 2 times, stripped of weapons, but at least you aren't in an electric chair this time. One nice thing about this level is the shading. None of the other levels made such good use of baked shadows to separate the indoors from outdoors, and it just looks great for its time. Starting out with no weapons also makes for some pretty tense moments like a sentry gun in the courtyard. You might not even get a revolver right away in the beginning if you're unlucky. While it's not the most open-ended level in the world, it makes good use of the prison environment for alarms, trip bombs, and snipers. Hold on tight because we're probing the depths. So the gimmick of this level is it's timed, and most of the level is on literal rails via minecart. I actually don't mind in this case because the level doesn't overstay its welcome and it provides a different kind of challenge. It straight up starts with an Indiana Jones boulder chase and you have to dodge 2 minecarts for the time machine part. It gets pretty intense. While there's a bit of the level that you play normally through, it's very obviously not the focus of it. The level itself lacks music, but the minecart ride has a very catchy jingle that you're hearing right now. There really isn't too much to say to the level apart from that. It's a pretty fast 6-minute level. If you're going to make a short linear level, this is probably the best way to do it, to be honest. It puts emphasis on urgency and action and nicely switches up the mechanics. It's time to ride high into a big fireball and hydrogen bomb. This is definitely my favorite of the Victorian era so far, though much of that probably has to do with a strong aesthetic. Going through a cargo bay, passenger section, bridge, and even the envelope of the blimp. Use the attack button up there and say hello to a big infernal fireball, even if you swing your fist. I guess Duke swings his fist so hard that it throws off sparks. It also introduces the Chimera, probably the closest to 3D's Protector drone, but with toxic gas instead of a shrink ray, so better don the gas mask. You'll also need the gas mask for another section covered in smoke unless you really like rapidly losing health. I enjoyed the level decently overall. There's just enough to justify looking around, and it provides some nice visuals among the rooms. Let's stretch out our muscles on the rack. Prepare for a hot take. As a castle-based map, I think this is so much more aesthetically pleasing than Quake's castle maps. Having played through them recently, none of them really compare to this visually, and I would even say this even plays better than most of Quake's maps. It's nicely spacious, has enough optional areas to make exploring the big castle fun, and has some cool moments like a catapult and using a cyborg soldier's severed head as a key. It's also where you find the second secret level, at least if you've been collecting the time machine parts in each level. It also made admittedly good use of the night vision goggles, with a dark area that annoyed me much less than Wet Worlds. I must admit, I'm pleasantly surprised coming back to it. It's time for some disgruntled asphalt and mean streets. It certainly knows how to make an entrance, with an explosion and a few rounds of aliens teleporting in, killing 1 soldier and possibly 1 or 2 of the remaining ones in this fight. In general, it seems like the soldiers here are out of their league, probably to show how badass and cool Duke is in comparison. Well, at least a guy with a tank gets a couple of glorious moments like busting down a barricade and blasting some aliens. I'm not normally a fan of kill steals, but I'll give this guy a pass. The level is mostly straightforward, but that's not to say it's without varying paths, including a complete parking lot that's totally optional. It also has a pretty colorful area with 2 ladies you can save, and honestly I like it more when you're saving them because that's more Duke. Sibling disputes come first in Brothers Nukem. The main gimmicks of the level are that there are aliens from all time periods and they're evil clones of Duke Nukem. Basically they act like deathmatch bots and each one have one of Duke's weapons. Definitely the weakest is the sniper, basically just a sniper enforcer with more health. The level itself seems like a straight line, but there's a good amount there if you go looking, like a rooftop section and a back alley that are optional. The level ends up skirting along a rooftop, which can be tense because falling just instantly kills you regardless of the amount of health you have left. Overall, I think it's a good level, even if I'm not entirely sold on the Duke clones. It's an interesting distraction if nothing else, and some like the Volt Cannon one are unique in what they offer. You're going to wish for the Mojave after you've gone through Nuclear Winter. It's actually pretty good, essentially remixing Mean Streets and adding a whole lot of stuff on top of it. It's Nuclear Winter with the Statue of Liberty and a Planet of the Apes homage and zombies roaming the earth. In addition to grenade-launching pigs, octobrains, mohawk sporting shotgun pigs, and even friggin' helicopters. It even introduces the Sniper Enforcers, very deadly but thankfully given away by their noobish laser scopes. Well, at least you get a new toy too in the form of the Havoc multi-launcher, and there's even some heat-seeking missiles if you can find them. Even though it's largely remixing a previous level, the way it does it is very well done, and it hardly feels like a clone with all the changes, unlike the expansion pack of the same name. It even has a secret exit if you're willing to take a swim. Leave your bottles at the door because we're in Dry Town. Say goodbye to modern firearms, at least mostly, and hello to revolvers, scopeless rifles, and sticks of dynamite. I'm going to say it, this level is just pure fun. It's not as large-scaled as the city maps, but it feels so much more dense. 2 different saloons, a gentleman's club, a hotel, a jail, a bank, and even gallows. That's good old-fashioned public execution. And if you're missing your modern gear, the claw, shotgun, and sniper rifle show up to give you a taste of home. You might have to get the sniper by force, though. The level even ends red light district style where Duke's under arrest, but instead of aliens, it's cute ladies. It even pokes fun of Nintendo's censorship practices at the time. What more could you ask for? This is the Titanic because we're going down. No, really, it's literally the Titanic, and I guess Duke was the one that sank it, not an iceberg. The dark implications of Duke's actions aside, I'd say it's a very good secret level overall. Most of the level, like a dining and kitchen area and basically all of the individual quarters, are optional and for exploration. There's even a grand staircase that looks very nice for N64 standards. I can see why it's shown off in the opening of the level. Given the type of aesthetic and being surrounded by blue, the best way I can describe it is it's Hydrogen Bomb, only much more expansive. Then the escape as the ship's flooding is pretty gripping as you rush to the entrance with a time warp in it. Overall, it's my favorite secret map I've ranked so far, in anything really.